I've always been a fan of cool challenge runs on YouTube. I really like watching people challenge themselves in different games in different ways. And one of the series that I really love to watch challenge runs on are the Souls franchise. I think watching people do a challenge run with, hey, can I beat this game with these rules is really cool. And I've even done some challenge runs in the past for Dark Souls 2. However, I am notoriously bad at video games. And so I wanted to really push myself. I wanted to really go for a challenge run in Elden Ring, a game that I love, that I haven't done a challenge run yet in, that would really push me to my limits. And so I gave myself a pretty strict rule set. I have to use a bow at all times. I'm allowed to use consumable items for range damage, but I'm not allowed to use sorceries, incantations, or any kind of pyromancies or dragon abilities. I must depend on a bow at all times. No melee. I am allowed to use summons specifically to farm, although there is a fight that I've already done in this video where I broke that, and so I will force myself to not use summons in boss fights for as long as I can, basically. I am not someone that has routed this game out the best way possible, and I am not someone that is able to finish this game in one video, as it were. So we're going to break this up into chunks, and you are going to get to see my journey as I slowly try to see, can I beat Elden Ring with just a bow? Probably not, but let's at least find out. I started with a bandit because I wanted to be quick on my feet, and I wanted to have pretty good dex, but also pretty good strength. In hindsight, I probably should have picked samurai, but we're here now, and I'm not starting over. The biggest challenge that I have in this run is arrows. And you may say, but you can farm for arrows. Well, sure. But because I'm only allowed to use a bow, that means that I have to use an arrow to get arrows to farm with. I also have to use arrows to get souls to buy arrows with. So you might see my conundrum here. Now, I did choose the Fanged Imp as my starting gift so that I could summon right away, something that was pretty stout and would be able to allow me to farm, but that means I have to be in a place where I am able to summon for them to be able to farm for me. Using those Fanged Imps leads to a lot of slow farming, as you will see, but I skipped my way through the tutorial pretty quickly because I did want to fight the Soldier of Godric, because I wanted to see what I was going to be up against here. What was going to be the real challenge of this run? Was it going to be my own lack of skill, or was it going to be my low damage output? And ultimately what I found was that the damage early on, it's okay. It does the job, right? It's serviceable. I can work with that. And the bow itself is really fun to use. I can get in a lot of kills really quick. I have the ability to pull individual enemies for the most part, and I can snipe long range enemies. However, very quickly the bow falls off damage-wise, and I had to go find alternatives. But as you can see here, this first encounter, this first boss fight, as it were, because I did not do well against the Grafted Scion, this first boss fight against the Soldier of Godric, it's okay. I feel like I definitely could have done better, and I want to do more challenge runs in this game. Maybe in those future runs, I'll be able to clean this up a little bit, because this is not a hard boss, but it was still less clean than it could have been. I really like the roll shot the short bow has. It's pretty solid. I didn't really take that many arrows. Took 8 to take down the Soldier of Godric, and I was feeling confident after that 8 arrows. I thought, yeah, it will not be a problem. I'm gonna breeze through this. All I've got to do is make sure that I dodge. No worries, I got this. After that, the first thing I did was head for Colin. I wanted to make sure that I could get the crafting pouch and be able to make arrows out of materials that I find, specifically beast bones. It was shortly after I got the ability to make them that I realized that I couldn't kill them unless I used an arrow. And you may say, well, Trey, it's fine. Just kill him off screen with a melee weapon. No one will ever know. No, but I'll know. I can't do that. That's not okay. The rules are ironclad. And so it was not easy. I did go ahead and try to talk to Ronnie because I forgot that you have to first go talk to Melina. So then I went to go talk to Melina. But this little stint here of I have 13 arrows to my name, and I have to use one of those to kill a wild animal to be able to make more, or I have to use some of them to kill a soldier to be able to get more, was very interesting. And so very quickly I realized that it would probably just be getting runes most of the time. If I could find beast bones on the ground or find enemies fighting each other, that would be great. But as you can see, it takes way too many arrows to kill an enemy that doesn't even drop enough to buy more arrows. So early on, I'm in pretty rough shape. I figured that it would get easier, especially once I get to the point where enemies are dropping more runes, which would allow me to buy more arrows, because eventually enemies would drop way more runes than it takes to buy the arrows that I use to kill them. Assuredly, assumedly. But all this made this first little area much more difficult than I expected it to be. But what I really enjoyed about it is that it made me pick my battles. I was way too reckless with my first set of arrows. And so very quickly I found myself with only 9 left and no way really to get more if I misused those. So it made me try to pick my battles and plan when to attack and where to attack and try to figure out how I was going to challenge it. And it's what made the challenge run feel challenging. Now, after getting Torrent, I knew where the first accessory that I wanted to pick up was. A talisman gives you extra range for your bow. That was something that I felt like was going to be pretty important. I wish that it was more useful than it actually is. I wish that it increased my damage in some way, but it does mean that my arrows fly a little bit more straight, and I don't have to worry about them dropping off quite as far, so it's worth getting. I went ahead and grabbed the golden seed that was up here and got the Sign of Grace. Talked to Roderica before heading for it, just so I would have it. And this accessory is useful. I'm glad I got it, but it was worth grabbing. I just don't know that it will be something that I'm going to keep very long. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of good bow charms in this game. So we will see how long I have to have this or how useful it winds up being. It also was not the easiest thing to grab when I only had 9 arrows and some pretty strong enemies were guarding it. I had to kind of kite them around, and then even when I got to the chest, somebody had put a message in front of it, so it was really difficult to get the message, and I died in the process, but that's okay, because I got the arrow charm. Even if it wasn't quite as clean an acquisition as I hoped it would be. From there, I headed back and talked to Ronnie so that I would have the ability to summon, because again, I was going to need to farm a lot. And bringing in my summons to farm was definitely going to be something I would have to do. I had decided at this point that I was not going to use summons for bosses, and I'm sticking with that for the rest of the series. But I did use my summons on a boss without thinking because I'm an idiot. And that unfortunately makes it where one of the bosses I did kill with the summons. But from now on, no more. No more. I spent a little bit of my time at this point using arrows to kill wild animals because I had yet to figure out just how little I would get, but after getting just a single feather from 2 eagles, I realized that this was a massive waste of time. I also didn't even have the crafting book yet to be able to make them from wild animals. I would get that later on, but it just was a waste all around. I had planned to ride the coast and go for the next Site of Grace so that I would be able to, you know, teleport around a little faster. Found a hole. Not my best moment. But as I warned you, dear viewer, I'm not good at video games. This is something you should be prepared for. There are going to be a lot of falls. There's going to be a lot of holes. After this, my plan was to use Eel in the lake to be able to get a bunch of souls by him killing enemies in the lake. Which unfortunately didn't work very well because it turns out the enemies that he kills when he enters don't really drop much. And also turns out that you can't just make him fire breathe at you on command to kill a bunch of the enemies. Would have been nice, but hey. So I decided to set my course south and see if I couldn't find a good spot to farm. I knew there were some soldiers that were fighting some demi-humans up here. And maybe that would be a good place to farm if I could just hang out near them while they were fighting. It turned out okay. It wasn't a very good farming spot. I couldn't summon my imps to be able to kill them for me for extra runes because there wasn't the ability to summon. And they didn't really drop a lot. It also took them a long time to kill each other. And so it's a decent spot to farm early on when I just needed some extra souls. but ultimately there are some places that definitely fit the bill better if I just need extra runes to be able to buy arrows. From here, I decided to go after my first major boss, which was also when I decided that I did not have enough arrows to kill a boss, and this was a foolish decision, and so I summoned Istvan. And shortly after this, I decided to go ahead and summon my imps too, because clearly I can't fight these guys on my own, undermining the experiment completely like a fool. I figured it was okay to summon everybody because this was like a gang fight where they were having a bunch of people and I was having a bunch of people. I do regret it now though, but I'm not going to start over. If you feel like it undermines the entire challenge, then yeah, I guess it does. And I'm sorry. I can redo this fight, this one specific fight if you want me to, but I will not be using summons for anything except for one small thing boss fight wise later on. The worst part is, I lose this fight after spending all of my arrows. So, now not only have I not won the fight, I can't attack anymore, and I'm completely reliant on either my boys to farm some runes for me so I can buy arrows, or on enemies fighting each other. Which is the biggest flaw, I think, with this run. Not having any recourse at all. Not even allowed to punch when I'm out of arrows. Maybe could have been ruled differently at the time, but I'd already broken enough rules, and I wasn't going to break more. I came across the Forlorn Gowl and knew that Daryl was in there, but I had no recourse to fight him because I didn't have any arrows, so I couldn't hurt him. But I did have another idea. I knew the bridge leading to this Weeping Peninsula would have the ability to summon my imps, and also some items I could pick up, and I could get the Grace on the other side. So I assumed that this would work. This would be a chance for me to farm a little bit while my Fanged Imps killed some enemies, and it would probably work out. It took a lot of back and forth. Summoning in the Imps, riding back and forth on Torrent, letting them get a couple kills or dying in the process, going back to the side of Grace, running back, spawning them again, but eventually I was able to get a decent number of souls from this. This farm worked a lot better than my previous farm, but was still not ideal. It wasn't quite what I was looking for. And it was during this farm that I think I broke a little bit inside. I attempted a Goomba Stomp on the enemies with Torrent, assuming for some reason that would work. It does not, by the way. It does no damage whatsoever. But I tried that far more times than I'd like to admit, and yeah, it does nothing. It does nothing at all. And between this farm and running around the map a little bit, finding some cemeteries, finding some drops, killing a few enemies, I was eventually able to raise my dex up to 20 and get a respectable amount of arrows. And I assumed that with my dex at 20 and a good number of arrows in my stock, I would be able to combat anything that I came across. This was not the case. I went back to rematch the Demi-Human Chiefs, and I just knew this time I would have them. I was going to go ahead and summon again because I already summoned once. This was another foolish mistake. In hindsight, I could have just not summoned this time, and then I never would have had to show the footage of how I summoned the first time. But since I did, I did. Istvan spent a good chunk of this time, of the first part of the boss fight at least, on the other side of the fog wall, fighting the enemies that nearly got me killed trying to get into the boss room. And I spent that entire chunk of the fight getting my face caved in by the boss's daggers. This is also where I ran into one of the biggest issues with a bow-only run that is going to continue to be an issue for the rest of this run. If an enemy is moving even remotely a little bit, there is a very high chance that you are going to miss with your arrow. Not because you shot poorly, but because the auto-tracking just is not able to keep up with an enemy that's moving for a projectile that's already been fired. So what this means is you either need to be really close range, shotgun range with your bow, or you just need to be prepared to burn a few arrows. There are a couple of enemies that exacerbate this issue as well, the Tibia Mariner, as you'll see, as well as any horse-mounted or flying enemies. Even a tiny movement can undermine your shots completely. Now, of course, I ruined all that by summoning, and thus the enemies focused on the summons, and I was able to ignore all that. I did try to be fancy here a little bit. I tried to cancel my shots, I tried to jump cancel, but realistically, there was no reason for any of that. The enemies weren't focused on me. There was no need to try and get fancy. As you can see, this fight became super easy with summons, and I do still deeply regret using them. In future challenge runs, I will be cognizant of the rules. I got kind of excited here. I was like, hey, there's going to be a lot of enemies. I'll summon in my posse too. Be squad, be squad. But this was the first Elden Ring challenge run that I'd done, and it turns out it's harder to take away some of the habits that I learned from my own playthroughs to use in the challenge run. So again, I do apologize. I do recognize that this absolutely undermined the difficulty of this fight, but this is far from the only fight where I'm going to be far more outnumbered, and in the rest of those, we won't be using summons. So, you know, for what it's worth, I do apologize again if this has ruined this run for you. I get it, but from this episode on, there won't be any more summons coming up in boss fights. So please don't just click off, or please do continue to watch, because I have learned my lesson, and I will be more cognizant of the rules moving forward. Now that I had some arrows, I actually had a pretty decent farming setup done, where I would kill a couple animals with regular arrows that I'd bought with runes to be able to get bone arrows that I could use to kill more animals. And this allowed me to slowly build up a pretty good amount of arrows. It still wasn't perfect. There would still be situations where I just had not enough bones to make arrows, and I wound up with using regular arrows again, but it did work. I give up on this pretty quickly after this. I spent probably an hour farming, and that hour might as well have been wasted, because by the end of it, I had used all of my bone arrows just trying to kill enemies to make more bone arrows. It worked for a while, and I think if I was using another weapon along with it, it probably would have kept working, but eventually I give up on it and just go back to using rune arrows for the most part. I grabbed the Side of Grace in front of the Tibia Mariner, but I didn't really feel comfortable enough to fight him yet, so I decided instead to run to Liurnia and see if I could pick up some good drops there as well. There are a couple items that I'm going to want in Liurnia, but they're a little bit harder to get than I thought they were going to be. So for now, we're going to hold off on those, and we're just going to grab a couple Side of Grace in Liurnia to hopefully give us a little bit more ability to farm. My main goal heading to Liurnia was hoping to find some enemies that fight each other that I could farm relatively easily, and I had a really good feeling that the Albinorics were going to be really easy to kill with arrows, would be my new ticket to a bunch of runes. Going to Liurnia also unlocked the Round Table Hold, which would of course allow me to further upgrade my bow, but would also give me Crebus's Black Key Crossbow, which would give me the ability to use bolts, which would give me a whole other set of ammo for if I ran out of arrows. Only to find out that Crebus's Black Key Crossbow requires more strength than I had, so that's on the list for things to do next. However, I never had to go to the Albinorics to get any decent Liurnia farm going, because I found there was a group of people that were fighting right over here, and all I had to do was just wait while they fought each other, and I could get pretty bad soul per hour, honestly. But it worked in a pinch. If I need more arrows, I can hide right here, and I can get some more runes. I did still want to try the Albinorics, though, because I just knew that it would work out. But this was a decent farm for a little while. I really wanted to be able to upgrade my weapon, and so in what was a really dumb idea, I decided to go for the Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel. Now, the Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel is great if you want the ball bearing to be able to, buy smithing stones, which was my intention. I would get that, I'd be good to go. However, bows aren't the ideal weapon for any of the tunnels, personally, because you don't do a lot of damage, because everything in there is resistant to it. I have not even attempted this boss yet, because I realize now that it is going to be very difficult to kill. However, I was able to get a couple smithing stones, and I did go back and take on a different tunnel, as you'll see in a little bit, and was able to get the stones needed to upgrade the bow that I'm using to a +2, and then eventually was able to move it up to a +3, but I will have to get more if I want to be able to upgrade it further, which means that eventually I will have to return to the Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel, and we'll have to try and beat the boss of it. After deciding that my goals lied elsewhere, I headed for Siofra, because I just imagined that the short bow had been doing fine, but if I could upgrade to the horn bow, which I knew was in Siofra, then I would be able to get a little bit more damage, and that might make all the difference. And find the horn bow I did, only to realize that I don't have enough intelligence to use the horn bow. So it was back to farming. I spent a little bit of time here in Siofra. I had arrows because of the grinding earlier, by which I mean sitting on the back of that skull and waiting while enemies killed each other. So I lit some fires so that I could try the boss, and got bullied by some of the ancestral followers, and, you know, had a right good time here. I needed a lot more runes to be able to level up to the point where I could use the 2 new weapons that I'd gained, which would theoretically increase my damage output quite a bit. So I headed for the village of the Albinaurics, because again, deep down in my soul, I just knew that I would be able to farm the Albinaurics, and that they would be easy to farm, and that I would have all the runes that I needed. I summoned my imps, I watched with pride as they went to attack the Albinaurics, and the Albinaurics dropped 60 souls. It was worse, rune-wise, than my previous farm. It was far worse. And the Fanged Imps couldn't even reliably kill them every time. So my AFK farm was by far still the much better farm. The Fanged Imps were dying to Albinaurics. Between that and realizing that I would have to go AFK some more, it was pretty sad. I was pretty heartbroken. But on the plus side, at least now I know. After farming for a little bit, I was finally able to get my intelligence up enough that I could use the horn bow. And I was so excited. I just knew this was going to be it. I was going to shoot this Albinauric, and I would see how much fresh new damage this horn bow could do. And it was okay. It was more damage for sure, but it was nowhere near the increase that I thought it was going to be. And I could tell at this point that I was going to have a tough time with this run. But I'm dedicated. By Jove, I'll do it. Eventually. Horn bow in hand, 99 arrows, I decided it was time to go take on the Tibia Mariner. After all, what did I have to lose? Now, this is another boss that summons a lot of enemies, and so you will notice at one point that I do summon my Fanged Imps, but I don't summon my Fanged Imps with the intention to fight the boss. I summon my Fanged Imps with the intention to deal with some of his skeletons. I know what I said earlier, and I know you may feel like this is also breaking the rules, but I specifically made sure I summoned them away from the boss so they would only deal with the mobs. Again, you may say, well, that's just, that's just playing around with the rules. That's just pretending that the rule... You can feel however you want to feel about it. That's okay. I understand. I just wanted to make sure you understood where I was coming from. If you're disappointed in me, I get it. I'm disappointed because they actually turned out to not be very helpful at all. I was doing decent damage against the Tibia Mariner. Unfortunately, it had the same problem that most other enemies that move have, which is that it's able to just not get hit by my arrows most of the time. But he also can teleport, and most of his basic attacks have him move far enough horizontally that arrows will just miss. It's really hard to pin him down, but there are a couple times where he's open, and if you can shoot him while he's doing his big charge-up attack, then you can do damage to all of his summons around him, which is really, really nice and made a big difference in this. This fight went on for a while because of these things. I had to get on Torrent a couple times and try to ride around, and I just knew that on Torrent, it'll be fine. I'll be able to track him down and be able to keep him evened out and can kill him. However, Torrent also made it harder to move and shoot at the same time, because while moving, I would lose track of my aim, which means that after about 10 full minutes of fighting, which obviously I have chopped up and sped up here, I was finally pretty low on arrows, pretty low on healing, but the Tibia Mariner was getting low too. Finally, it came down to the wire. Out of healing, almost out of arrows. I could not afford to miss, or I would lose this fight. And finally, after a painstaking eternity, stress levels through the roof, with 3 arrows left to go, after spending 96 arrows, the Tibia Mariner went down. This is why I love challenge runs. You put yourself up against the wall and have an unforgettable fight with an enemy that otherwise is kind of just okay. A boss fight that Yeah, it's a little memorable, but it doesn't stand out among all the others. But I will never forget this experience. I will never forget using 96 arrows to kill the Tibia Mariner and being on the edge of my seat, not knowing if I would hit or if I would miss. One hit from any enemy, and they were all around me, away from losing the entire thing. Such an incredible experience. I love challenge runs. Now I had my new bow. I'd killed the Tibia Mariner, got some more arrows, and I felt like I could take on anybody. So when I saw a Knight's Cavalry on the way to the castle in the south, I just knew I could take him. And I missed my first shot, and I missed my second shot, and I may not have missed my third shot, but I sure did the fourth. And that led me to realize that fighting enemies on horseback is not the best idea. He is constantly moving, which means that he is constantly dodging all of my arrows. I am constantly missing him, and one swing of his weapon, unfortunately, does most of my health bar. It was not the worst thing in the world when he killed me. We'll come back for him later when we have more arrows and do a little bit more damage, and thus don't have to worry so much if we miss. And while he's killing me, I just want to remind everybody how much I appreciate you watching this. And, you know, you could like and subscribe if you want to. That'd be great. Give me ideas for more challenge runs in the comment section down below. Castle Morn was my next opportunity for a great farming spot. I just knew I would summon my fanged imps. They would take care of the demi-humans. I could just sit back. It would be a great new AFK farm. Maybe clean up a couple if I needed to. And I would be set. No more having to sit on the back of that helmet in Liurnia. I figured I'd pull the first one and let them get to work. And I did decent damage to the first one. Kind of made me feel like I could just farm it myself. It would be 3 arrows per, but as long as they dropped enough souls, it wouldn't matter. And with my fanged imps to help me out, Tide of Grace just down the elevator, it could work. They dropped enough that it would pay for itself. I just wouldn't be making much profit to be able to buy arrows. The imps, however, were not as good as I hoped they would be here. They did the job, but up against some of the bigger enemies, they really struggled. And it led me to believe that it's gonna be time soon to change out the imps, probably. I can't upgrade them until I can get some Glovewort 2, which I have yet to go to a place that I could. That's an option. I could upgrade the imps, but there's a couple summons that I think I would rather have. So that's going to be one of the priorities for what I want to do next. But there's quite a few things that we need to be doing. And I know this is going to get brought up at some point, so we might as well go ahead and cover it now. The question may come of, hey Trey, why don't you just go and kill the dragon in Caelid, and that'll give you all of it that you need, because there you go. The dragon gives you so many souls. However, you need a bleed weapon to be able to kill it quickly, and even then it's not quick, and I can't use weapons, and there aren't enough arrows in the world to kill that thing, let alone enough that I could carry at this point in the game. So that is unfortunately not an option, as nice as it would be. After this, I headed to Caelid because I knew there was a boss there that would be super easy to kill, that would give me quite a few souls, that would hopefully let me be able to take up my other weapon as well, and get some extra arrows in case I needed them, as well as some extra levels. And that was O'Neill. Now, it was never said in the rules that I couldn't kill a boss with environmental damage, and O'Neill is incredibly easy to kill with environmental damage. There was kind of a surprise here in the form of one of his summons followed me further than I've ever seen them come before. And also I forgot there was a knight from the Howling Tree here, and that wound up being really interesting. I've killed O'Neill this way many times, and I've never had that happen. This was far from the cleanest O'Neill that I've ever had. I should have probably dealt with that archer way sooner. I might have been able to get out of this without taking any damage at all, other than a little bit of environmental damage that I took. And I have killed him before without ever taking any environmental damage. So that was my personal goal, which I did not achieve. But ultimately, it still worked out, and I didn't have to use any arrows, really. So I'm not complaining. Beating O'Neill did let me level up enough that I could equip the crossbow. And I just knew, with these two weapons together, the horn bow and Crebus's Black Key crossbow, I would be unstoppable. This was the key. Key crossbow, Corpus's Black Key crossbow, was the key to beating Elden Ring with this bow and crossbow only build. Before I could truly utilize the horn bow, and the crossbow, I needed to level them up, which means I needed to take on the tunnels, specifically the Limgrave tunnels, and I needed to get a lot of souls. So that meant that I needed to go for the boss of the Limgrave tunnels, which honestly was a lot more fun of a fight than I thought it was going to be. I expected the Stone Digger Troll to really be a problem, but I did a lot of damage with Mighty Shot, and that meant that I always had to look for opportunities to use Mighty Shot. As long as I had the right timing to hit him with a Mighty Shot, I was doing considerable amounts of damage. But it meant that I had to basically relearn his moveset from a melee build, because it wasn't about just getting a quick swing in and doing good damage. It was about getting enough time for a Mighty Shot, because a regular arrow was just not doing enough damage. And I wound up using all of my Flash of Cerulean Tears and basically having it come down to the wire. But it was a very, very enjoyable fight, and I'm really digging the Horn Bow. Once I get it upgraded, I think it's going to be really strong. I think it might just win the day for us. And at this point, I was cocky. I no longer thought that I needed the crossbow. I could do this with just the horn bow. I gathered my will. I went and summoned Roger so that I can complete his quest. I was not intending to use him for this boss fight. I just wanted to see how much damage I could do to Margit, but I knew it would be a lot. I entered Margit's arena. I drew back my horn bow. I took my first shot. No. 86 damage, that's not enough. No. Mighty Shot, 167. That's doable. We can make that work, but we're not doing this. We're gonna pump those numbers up first, and then we're gonna come back and fight Margit. We're gonna leave it at that for this first video. There's definitely a lot more to come. There's a lot more of the game to go, and I'm really enjoying this challenge run, so I want to do a lot more. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Berate me for using my summons in those 2 fights. Tell me what kind of challenge runs you'd like to see us do next, or your favorite challenge runs to do in Elden Ring. What game you would like us to see do a challenge run in next. Let us know your thoughts, because this series is only going to grow, and I really love doing these kinds of videos where I just record snippets of audio after I do a thing, explaining what I did, and then have to come back in later and edit it all together. It's actually really fun for me. But until next time, I've been Trey. This has been the Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum that Elden Ring has to offer. Test. Editor Trey. Show me a scene, do. Show me a video that I've never seen, do. Click on the links above you right now. You'll see a video that owns this town.